Good morning, everyone. You're listening to Turtle Island News with Tracey Kennedy, live on Revolution Radio, Studio A, turtleislandnews.info. What used to be Scottish Sovereigns on the Land, they have now changed to For the People, by the People, so congratulations, guys, on new names. Awake Radio Group. Don't know how many I'm on there. Good morning, Steve and everybody. And Wolf Spirit Radio. They are doing a whole bunch of work next door. If it gets too annoying, I will play you something else that I had set up. I had originally started, my idea was to play you something, but we've had some world events and some horrific events in Canada that I thought I need to deal with. Now again, right on cue, as China said, another 2 massive quakes have already devastated Nepal. Another 2 major earthquakes struck eastern Nepal 2 weeks after more than 8,000 people were killed outright in the devastating quake, just as China predicted. It does not surprise me, however, because China is in the process of raping the heck out of that country, following the colonist ideas, of course. They are changing names of towns, making the children all learn Chinese, and causing devastation in general. Now, the latest earthquakes hit near a town called Nampanchi Bazar, near Mount Everest. The U.S. Geological Survey had it at a magnitude 7.4, but I had actually read something a little bit stronger, of course, like a 7.8 or an 8.2, believe it or not. This latest terror, anyway, was felt as far as the Indian capital of Delhi. This area, Kadari, Nepal, again, is another one with ancient sites. Incredible. So after Nepal, and I don't need to play it down, but the 4th and 5th quakes of May, and the 43rd and 44th of 2015. So they are getting hammered. And after Nepal, can we just say that big earthquakes are increasing? I don't know. 2015 is actually lower than average for big quakes so far, surprisingly enough. But I wanted to look. After Nepal disaster last week, they're saying between 7,000 and 10,000, which seems like a very broad stroke there. But after those people lost their lives, it'd be forgiven if you thought that magnitude 6 quakes were on the increase, but actually it has been quite years so far. At this point in 2013, 49 plus 6 magnitude quakes were registered, but we have to remember that they changed the standard, lowered it. So what we're calling a 7 now used to be an 8. So once again, the figures are deceiving. When we're trying to see the amazing paradox of what's going on in this planet and the incredible stupidity. And we have seen an amazing paradox in the last 114 years. And again, because they're fudging the data. So it's very hard to tell. And I did put this article up so you can look. It's very hard to tell whether or not These are increasing, but the devastation, of course, whether or not the numbers are lower, is horrific. Now, in Nicaragua, the Telica volcano erupts, causing residents to flee already. Again, and this is terrifying, an alert and a mystery. Mystery unless you've actually done some reading. That the appearance of 37 dead whales in Chile. Horrific. In Nau, it hit Philippines as a super typhoon yet again. To our American brothers and sisters out there, last week just passed, America's aging nuclear facilities have a really bad week as 4 plants shut down once again. And of course we heard almost nothing about it. And the problems with the U.S. aged nuclear facility is one of the problems with the facilities around the world, because they were made by you. Probably the only thing that you guys made as much as, I don't know, prisons. And a large explosion that rocked the Indian Point nuclear plant in upstate New York. Facilities management reported. The company running the plant said the affected parts on the facility were safely shut down. Because we're going to believe these guys. They'd never lie to us. And were safe and stable after a transformer failure. Happened on Saturday. Now the spokesperson told Reuters that the fire in the transporter had been extinguished. There was no danger. Oh my God. Meanwhile, earlier, just last week, Oyster Creek nuclear plant in Lacey Township was shut down again, this time because of an electrical disturbance in the non-nuclear part of the plant. Their words, not mine. The shutdown did not present any health risk or safety risk. The transformers is used to step up power produced by the plant before it's sent to the grid. So it is on the non-nuclear side of the plant. Okay. In what must have been a freaking terrifying experience, people living near 3 Mile Island, remember that name? Nuclear plant, heard a loud release of steam 1 in the morning. Now, this was Wednesday as the plant was shut down after an electrical issue developed in the reactor. The aging plant was taken out of service after a problem developed in the electrical components that operate the control rods in the reactor. These control rods control the nuclear reaction in the reactor. The issue with the control rod presented once again. There is no danger. Everyone take your pill. Now, there had been a shutdown due to steam, that's what they said, leak on Saturday as well. The spokesperson just called it's an unusual event, so they'll give us that, which is the lowest level of emergency classification. The leak, once again, was found in a non-nuclear part of the plant. The shutdown had not been related to the storms on Saturday. What do you say? What do you even say? Like, they're lying to us, this we know. I don't know how many planes have to fall from the sky, or random explosions, or people just going nuts before. Others believe that there's a problem on this planet with just about everything. We are getting massive amounts of, and it used to be called rare, red auroras at night, which used to be a rare thing, but I've seen them 6 months in a row here. I'm not that far north, guys. There's a whole bunch of United States that's not as north, of course. Now in Canada, the Grand Chief is horrified once again because Alberta quietly has allowed organ harvesting from the children who die in provincial care. Now, although we're hearing this all over Canada, the amount of children who die in provincial care is huge. Of course, to be in provincial care in almost any province, you must be some brown-skinned person. Young white children, they are allowed to stay home and get the crap beat out of them. But anyway, Treaty 6 Chief said he was upset that First Nations were not made aware of the practice until now. That it is policy, the harvesting of organs from children who die in care is across Canada. Having just learned of this policy himself, he was horrified, appalled, and quite frankly, mad as hell. Can I say hell, or is that one of the bad words? Anyway, this is happening, and it has been working quietly in the background for as long as the settlers came over here. With an already high, disproportionately high number of Aboriginal children in care. A 2013 investigation conducted by Edmonton Journal and Calgary Herald revealed a startling trend in the deaths of children in care. The investigation covered that while only 9% of children were Indigenous. Now remember, when we say Indigenous, we mean carded status Indians, which means their mother could not have admitted that she married a white guy, which makes the children not Indigenous in Canada anymore. You know that, right? Well, anyway, they accounted for 75% of the children who died in foster care since 1999. So even though they fudged the numbers, they can't lie about who's dying. So we have our children in care dying right now. And we find out that they are being harvested for their organs. Could not be related, of course, to the two things. Disgusting that they are dying under provincial care, of course, in the provincial system. Last year, we had 20 Aboriginal children die in care. Does this policy mean all these kids had their organs removed? No way to find out, because those records are lost and they refuse to hand them over. This practice needs to stop immediately. Now, part of our culture is that the body must be whole when it goes back to the Creator, not dissected. And the problem is that we are not part of this conversation. Instead, the problem is just did it. In the 8 years this policy has been officially in place, we have no idea how many of our children have been sent back with missing parts. Honestly, people aren't shocked by this. They just aren't listening. We are concerned First Nations organization has no access to the records to even find out information on the children who have died in care and if their organs have been removed, and this is just one chief in one province. Treaty 8 is aware of at least one instance of the province harvesting dead children's organs without consent, but as we know, they don't ask. The Ministry of Health said they were more than willing to sit down and discuss concerns over this policy. Discuss. We're going to have a conversation with these people. They said it's extremely rare for medical authorities to ask for organ and tissue donations. Okay, let me hold that for a minute. Since these children in Canada who are First Nations, carded or not, have an overwhelmingly O blood type, with some rare and surprisingly O negative blood types depending on how mixed you are, which is a reality of all the people who have been invaded by Europeans. Just being honest here. Now, because we have an overwhelmingly O blood type, our organs are fought over. The people with O negative, this is the only blood type that can't reproduce in a lab. These children are being cropped out. They are going to care for a reason. They are dying in care for a reason. And they are being harvested for a reason. Can I prove this? No. But as we talk about what the policies of colonization have always been, this is not out of the question. When we look at Australia, whose last full-blooded Aboriginal, that's the name Europeans called them, died in the 1800s, realize being full-blooded is almost impossible now. And yes, of course, I'm going to get the emails saying, Tracey, I know somebody whose mother is Native and so is his father. Yes, full-blooded Native? I doubt it. Or we wouldn't have such light skin. You can tell the natives who haven't intermarried as much. Those ones are still dark-skinned. Anyway, among the general population, only 1 to 2% of people are considered suitable for donations when they die. Of the population, pretty much worldwide, believe it or not. I didn't know they were that strict on these things, but apparently they are. In fact, they're saying there are only 2 occurrences involving children in care in the recent years. One involved a child who was not Aboriginal, and in that matter the father, when located, was supportive of the decision. In the other, consent was provided based on the directions and the wishes of the youth, who was 8. She says to herself. When making a decision about organ and tissue donation, they're calling it a donation now, for children in care, cultural and religious beliefs and practices are essential considerations as well as preferences of the child were appropriate and the child's family, which they didn't ask. Organ donation was first created in 2006, which probably means before 2006 they were just taking them. In 2014, the policy expanded to include all children in the care of temporary guardianship order. And I have more on that on turtleislandnews.info, so just check it out. Doesn't stop there. The Alberta doctor that I told you about that found and reported the higher rates of cancer in all First Nations communities, especially if they're close to pipelines, fracking sites. Well, this doctor, who had been supporting and servicing the community of Fort Chipewyan, Alberta, Fort Chip, known by most, has been fired with no explanation. Dr. John O'Connor made international headlines when he was the first to speak out about elevated cancer rates in northern Alberta communities, whose, by the way, water has been polluted for the last 100 years thanks to said rape and pillage. Anyway, he believed they were all linked to the tar sands activity from toxins leaking into the surrounding land and the water system, a claim that was supported by a study that Health Canada refused to fund. So he paid for it out of his own pocket and a few conscientious doctors. He was in shock, O'Connor said, about the sudden termination. Stunned. He got a chest pain when he heard this. Very sad. O'Connor has worked in a small community of Fort Chip, 300 kilometers north of Fort McMurray, for almost 16 years. He was fired from a place that is almost impossible to get doctors. O'Connor received a termination letter via email from the health director Friday afternoon, after advising that his professional services were no longer required, effective immediately. In addition, you have no authority to speak or represent the Health Board Society in any way to any other individual or party or entity. He mailed back and asked why. No response. It's like losing a very close family member. Not only can he not practice there, he can't help. If anyone calls him to help, they will put him in jail. If he continues talking about the things that he's found, he will go to jail. This is the new Canada. Coming to a prisoner of war camp near you, and I don't care what you call the corporate government thing that you work for. You are not in a country. You are in a FEMA camp. 2007, 4 years after O'Connor sounded the alarm regarding his concerns of this rare, strange type of cancer. He noticed trending in residents in Fort Chip, in a place that for a little while had no cancer. And you will find pockets of places like this around the world. They're the ones who get naturally occurring vitamin B17. I'm not pushing a vitamin, just look it up, see what foods it's in, what natural things growing it's in, what animals it's in. Those people worldwide, no matter what shade of skin, when they eat it, they don't get cancer. By the way, just a whole bunch of those people in Nepal were just slaughtered by an earthquake, which was accidental. Anywho, Health Canada accused this doctor of engineering mistrust, blocking access to files, billing irregularities, raising undue alarm in the community, worshipping Satan in the Baphomet. Okay, not the last two, but they might as well have. Anyway, professional misconduct charges were threatened. They threatened his medical license with the Alberta College of Physicians and Surgeons. You know, like the first man who told other doctors, wash your hands before you're giving birth. You know what they did to him, right? They revoked his license, put him in an insane asylum, and had him killed for saying washing your hands. This is the medical system of which we are under. In 2009, the residents of Fort Chip released a statement in report and support of O'Connor, demanding the charges against him be dismissed and that he had been a good doctor and was helping them when no one else was. A charge of causing undue alarm. In the statement by the residents of Fort Chippewa, frustration because the residents of this community have never been consulted on whether we agree with any of these charges, and disbelief that the very responsible authority who is charged with protecting our interests and our health was actually logging the complaints against Dr. O'Connor, rather than coming to the aid of the community who was dying at exponential rates. O'Connor, on his own, had been providing 24/7 on-call medical care to remote communities for the last several years, and has built relationships with the people there. A doctor you can still call on the phone. Do you believe that? Relationships, he said, that are harder to establish in an Aboriginal community. Why? Because we don't trust you. Should we? So it takes a while. Once we soften up, things change. Anyway, another doctor who had been working alongside O'Connor for 3 years left suddenly without explanation 3 weeks ago. No note, no nothing. O'Connor said that 2 new doctors are being brought in to service the community. However, he's concerned that it may be difficult for them to become familiar with patient files, complex treatment plans. He won't be consulted. He's no longer allowed. Residents have been overwhelming supportive that he went out on a limb speaking out about the higher rates of cancer, in particular cancers there. Now that he's gone, they have no one to turn to. National news says that no matter what happens, he is going to continue to advocate for the community, push the Albertan government to follow through on a commitment for a comprehensive health study of cancer rates in the region. Well, they're already dying. We don't need a study. But of course, the 2 people who were actually helping the people there have been banned. Once again, one of the people just disappeared. A doctor just didn't show up for work. This is Canada. This is Canada. I don't know if it surprises you. Quebec's provincial police are being investigated once again from a video that appears to show 2 of its officers beating an Inuit man. So this is northern Quebec, which, the Inuit still live up there. This man, of course, lives in a remote community and was recovering from a recent brain surgery. His people, who, by the way, did not get cancer until they were forced to eat the Western diet that is killing people worldwide. We know for a fact that poverty doesn't leave just a mark on our soul, that it changes your DNA. And that changed DNA are passed on to people. People who live in poverty for generations are biochemically a different species. Not just race here, species. DNA is programmed to turn certain genes on or up or down by adding chemical markers in specific places. We've been told for years that there are 4 what should we call them, specific codes in here. Well, there are 6. There are probably a hell of a lot more that they haven't just found yet. Is it any wonder that certain races are being targeted? They know that poverty doesn't just mess with your head. It messes with you so that your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren will find it almost impossible to recover. And do you know what Indian status does here? Let's talk about one unsolved case of a murdered woman in Canada. Summer of 1998. Meg Sywick, first name Margaret, last name Sywick. Why? Because, one or more of her relatives in the past generation have been raped into mixedness. Was it always rape? No. Was it a plan? Absolutely. Anyway, her husband, Tom, also not a native name, and a medicine man from Pine Ridge, South Dakota, had traveled to southern Ontario. Why? Because it's an important place and our people used to be able to just go back and forth. Borders are just your little lines to divide people. And it kind of makes me sick. If you're not getting how sick I am of this, I'm going to tell you, I'm pretty sick of it. Anywho, the purpose of her trip was to release 2 spirits. The spirit of Meg's sister Sonia and the spirit of Sonia's unborn child. Hundreds of friends and family have gathered amid the greenery of Southwood Earthworks, a 40-minute drive southwest of London, Ontario. 4 years earlier, Sonia's body had been found in that exact spot. They were about to perform the ancient ceremony when the medicine man, Floyd, also not a native name, but at least his last name is, looks for Buffalo Hand, turned to Meg and asked what her Indian name was. Sonia said, "No, I do not have one." He paused and told Meg, "I have to give you a name." He thought for a few moments. He gave Sonia a name from the Lakota tribe, to which Tom had been adopted. Meg no longer remembers the Lakota version, since, she's since translated to Ojibwe. Bisqua Nudin Kawi. It means whirlwind woman, Floyd told Meg, like a column of air, whirling dust, snow or rain, like a tornado. He said, whenever you see that, you'll know that Sonia's bringing you a message. For an Aboriginal person in Canada, status is significant. It gives those with it access to numerous federal programs and services. Yet the designation is not an indigenous concept. It isn't. It's a construct of the federal government and the rules that government. It's complex, its construction, its construct. They're so complex, it's mind-boggling. Now, the federal government has the responsibility to status Indians under the Indian Act, as well as responsibility to Inuit people. The Supreme Court will hear an appeal this fall on the long-running court battle about whether Métis and non-status Indians are legally Indians. Also, not our name, for ourselves. And therefore, whether or not we have rights as the Inuit, as the status Indians. In Meg and Sonia's family, their father had no status. Their mother had status but lost it for marrying him. And Meg and Sonia and their brothers and their sisters have no status at all. Your status as an Indian, according to the federal government now, acts like a proxy for traditional membership into an Aboriginal community, even though it shouldn't, said Larry Chartrand, Métis Law professor, University of Ottawa, who specializes on the issues of Indigenous identity. Yeah, we got lawyers now, of course. Anyway, if you don't have status, it's assumed that you aren't Indian enough to be part of a community, and that you have pretty devastating impacts to you personally. Without status, Chartrand says, you can't live on the reserve anymore. You can't participate in the community decision-making or benefits. It means more than just looking or losing a status or being discriminated. It's actually a loss of culture. It is a loss of the way of life. First Nations woman used to lose her status if she married a man without status, native or not. What's more, any First Nations person, male or female, used to lose status by earning a university degree. Oh yes, joining the army, becoming a doctor, becoming a lawyer. And that was up until 1960. Even registering to vote in a federal election, you lost your status. Bill C-31, one of the long list of kill bills. If you want to hear about these bills, again, I would recommend you go to my YouTube, type in kill bills, you will find my name. Look at this. Anyway, which amended the Indian Act in 1985, but it's been amended again. Anyway, at first it solves some troubling automatic loss of status problems. But it did so by categorizing First Nations person as either non-status or status. Although you could be status 6.1 or status 6.2. This change discriminated specifically against women because status still more easily passed down by men than by women, even though we keep our mother's name. Totally changed how we did things. Now, women with reinstated status were 6.1. Their children were 6.2. So in comparison, men with status who married non-status women could confer their status, 6.1 or 6.2, as applicable on their wives, whether these women were Aboriginal or not. And this made their children 6.1. Thus, women who chose to marry out have fewer entitlements than men do, or the men who do so. And this extends to the children of all such unions. This injustice was recently addressed when the battle led to Bill C-3, the government's attempt to remedy Bill C-31's inherent racism and sexism. via European law. But even that change, many say, again, problematic. Implications of losing and regaining status remain severe, and a number of communities have begun waging court battles to prevent those with regained status from returning to communities. Esther Ruth McGregor. We saw what happened there. Meg and Sonia's sister was a member of Whitefish River First Nation and status Indian. However, Esther, of mostly Ojibwe ancestry with a little Scottish mixed in, obviously, lost her status in the summer of 1949 when she married Wilfred Laurier Siwick Sr. Wilfred's mother was Ojibwe and Odawa with status, but his father was Polish, so when they married, Wilfred's mother lost her status too. With me? I know it gets complicated. Anyway, Sonia Nadine May Siwick was born in Little Current on Manitoulin Island, which is really pretty, by the way, August 19, 1963. She, like her siblings, entered the world without status. The children grew up in Whitefish River First Nation, but not really in Whitefish River First Nation, because she had no status. She was there, but it didn't count. With me? So they lived there. But only because it was a plot leased by the Canadian Pacific Railway, Wilfred's employers. Now, amongst other things, their lack of status meant that they had to acquire their educations off the reserve. They were not allowed to go to the school on the reserve. They had to be bused daily to and from a school in Estonia, roughly 30 miles away. With children's options limited, they were taught simulation techniques. The family spoke English at home. The children acquired just enough Ojibwe to understand their mother's voice. She continually impressed on them the importance of getting educated, then building a home, being a productive member of society, but it had to be elsewhere. But the children, well, the mother and the father, worked hard to make sure that the kids were educated, ambitious. Often that meant boisterous debates over the dinner table. Sonia was smart, driven. She was also attentive and kind, that all she knew. However, sexually assaulted as a teenager. After this trauma, she began to struggle. She got pregnant. She dropped out of high school. So it happened in the high school that was in the neighboring community that probably had no native kids. Our judgment. I'm guessing. Anyway, she gave birth to a baby boy. The boy was adopted by a relative, which is pretty traditional in such situations, because she was young. After the adoption, Sonia began to use drugs and alcohol to cope. Years before she was killed anyway, she turned to sex work. Yet Sonia could still summon her drive. 1991, Meg drove Sonia to a treatment facility in London. She dropped her sister off to get clean, and Sonia actually did. She would remain in London until her death, attending both Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. She was a struggling young woman making a concerted effort to begin to control her life. But Sonia was also the great eluder, Meg says. She'd put on a smile. She'd laugh. She'd make you think everything was all right. That she was all right. That you didn't need to worry. But, going into an all-white school, I'm going to tell you, that was a skill you better learn early. The last time Meg saw her sister, July 1994, Meg and Tom held an informal family reunion. Anishinaabe Spiritual Center in Espanola, a really pretty town. I've been there. A little bit north. Anyway, Sonia made the 6-hour trip from London, so 6 hours north. Meg remembers her sister looking really gaunt, really sickly, pale. That night she could hear Sonia's seemingly endless cough through the apartment's thin walls. None of us even got it. None of us. Even we didn't. I don't think anybody gave it any thought that she was really sick, Meg says. It should have been the first sign, the last sign, for us to realize something wasn't right. But in a family that had been so well trained, is my opinion, to hide their feelings if you had lived that life, it would be easy to not see what you're seeing. Meg thinks Sonia must have fallen back in. Wrong crowd. She must have started using again. But what exactly happened between the day of their reunion and the day her body was found, the family just doesn't know. Meg says only learned Sonia was pregnant from their sister's friends at Sonia's funeral. She's named for the unborn niece or nephew, Jacob, in hopes justice, when it comes, might be for both Sonia and her child. Now Meg says that she was told her sister died from blunt force trauma, which surprisingly is not a cold. But the Ontario Provincial Police says investigators have no plans to release Sonia's cause of death or publicly identify any suspects. Last summer, on the 20th anniversary of her disappearance, $60,000 reward for information was renewed, $10,000 of which comes from Meg and Tom. The case is unsolved. And despite her sister's death, Meg has taken a stand against national inquiry into murdered and missing Aboriginal women, a position that is not popular. And I'll tell you more about this. Don't know if I should start now. It's almost break time. Would you believe that? Got it so fast, eh? In Canada, where I live, this is such a factor now. It really is. Such a factor where I actually have been warned places where I can go, and it's not like I'm going to be hanging out doing drugs or, walking dangerous parts of the city. But the fact that I really have to think about that all the time, where I still have to worry about my son walking on the street, where I still have to worry about my dad unloading his car after a gig. Cops will block him in his own driveway because he's the wrong color to own a house. And it's not just here. American cops are more heavily armed than frontline U.S. combat soldiers in active war zones. Police in Ferguson have better armor, better weaponry than soldiers. Even though they're still killing brown people. Of course, you don't see them going to Germany. Someone identifying themselves as 82nd Airborne Army veteran, observing the Ferguson police scene, commented, "We rolled lighter than that, in an actual war zone." Constitutional civil rights lawyers, John Whitehouse, notes that Homeland Security officers within the United States have 3 times as much ammunition as frontline soldiers in Afghanistan because they really don't care if you die there. Again, my opinion. What I'm really against. I'm against pornography because it just sets up bad expectations of what a cable guy will do and how fast a plumber will get there. Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to Turtle Island News with Tracey Kennedy, live on Wolf Spirit Radio, turtleislandnews.info. Scottish Sovereigns on the Land. Oh my God, I did it again. I'm not going to get used to the new name. For the people, by the people. Scottish brothers and sisters. And, of course, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Studio 8 right now. I'd like to remind everyone we're all listener supportive. And, of course, we can use your help. We're flying this last branch of sovereignty alone. I don't know if we could even call it sovereignty, living in a freedom camp such as we are. Many combat veterans have been pointing out lately SWAT officers far more heavily armed and outfitted than they themselves are while patrolling the streets of Iraq or Afghanistan. Indeed, many veterans have noticed that American police are more heavily armed than they were when fighting and serving front lines. So we've decided, I guess, as a society, that local police forces need greater armor capabilities than the invasion force in 2003. We have that, and of course we have Netanyahu driving Palestinians from Jerusalem. Netanyahu and the people who are calling themselves Israeli, living in Israel, who have no business there and are not genetically of that land. They're not. Palestinians are being ordered to destroy their homes and pay $1,000 in fines and are being slaughtered as we speak. Israeli authorities have issued a whole new draft of demolition orders to Palestinians living in occupied East Jerusalem. Sunday, Israeli court approved the demolition of 8 Palestinian homes. The court said the owners must destroy the homes themselves and pay fines of $49,000 of shekels. In March, ahead of the elections for Israel's parliament, Prime Minister Benjamin promised to expand settlements in the occupied city and continued the slaughter, validating all the racist laws, slaughtering everyone with the real Jewish bloodline from Ethiopia and everywhere else in Africa. It is so disgusting, you know. The unfree elections, corporate media, UK general election, and predictable outcomes, of course. What is this world we live in? And race and class in America, which is the big problem, and they know it's not just physically unhealthy, it's mentally unhealthy, and they know that it's killing us as a people worldwide. In the aftermath, the eruption of anger in Baltimore over yet another execution-style killing. The media and political establishments are seeking to conceal the real social and political issues at stake here. The killing of 25-year-old Gray last month was only the latest in a wave of police murders around the United States, triggering clashes with the police. Demonstrations, of course, to spread to other cities. Police military occupation of the city that was only lifted last week. While Gray's murder was the catalyst, the scope and the magnitude of the social discontent worldwide is always fueled by desolate conditions confronting working class people, especially in cities poorest, largely a minority, which is hilarious. Poor neighborhoods, minority. Look at the planet. Let's look at this planet, okay? Where is Europe? Picture Europe in your mind. Don't talk about the north of Europe, where people are actually pretty brown skinned, related to the Inuit. Don't look at the south of Europe, where again people are mixed, got a lot of African in there. Don't look at the east of Europe. Lots of Romani, lots of brown skinned people. You get a little past that line, everybody's Asian. Look at this tiny little place. And then picture the rest of the world. Are you seeing it with me? Picture all the rest of the world where you're going to find various brown eyes, various brown hair, various brown skin. You have not yet been able to rape that out of us. Much of the political elite that runs Baltimore, you're right, is African American, including the mayor, including the police chief, and the majority of the city council. Although this fact has seriously undermined the arguments of the proponents of identity politics, it has not stopped them from insisting once again that the essential division in society is race, not class. On Sunday, the New York Times published a lead editorial, How Racism Doomed Baltimore. The newspaper, which sets the tone, of course, for what is described as a liberal public opinion in America, declared conditions in the city could only be understood within the context of the city's racism, segregation. Americans think of Maryland as a northern state. It's distinctly southern in its attitude towards race. The efforts to disenfranchise black voters in 1905 to more contemporary examples of racial segregation in public housing is ongoing. The desperate condition, however, of young, low-income men cannot be understood outside the context of century-long assault on Baltimore's blacks, what they have endured at the hands of local, state, federal policymakers whom worked to quarantine black residents in ghettos, making it difficult even for the people of means to move to integrated areas that offer better jobs. Baltimore, like most cities in the United States, has a history of racial segregation. That does not mean every city is run by Ku Klux Klan. It just means it's almost impossible to break out of the cycle of poverty. I am not talking about night riders covered in white sheets. The political establishment in all the cities, whether the color doesn't matter. There is a class here that we are talking about. 3 of the 6 cops indicated for Gray's killing, including the driver of the police van, were African American. The relentless police violence stems not just from racism, but from class oppression. And if you want to be dark and get along, you better forget your brothers and sisters. That is what's taught. Black politicians defend no less than their white counterparts, unable to obtain hatred and fear of the city's youth after sporadic rioting on the day of Gray's funeral. Baltimore Mayor Stephanie Rawlings declared, "Too many people have spent generations building up a city for it to be destroyed by thugs who are tearing down what so many have fought for." She speaks for a layer of wealthy African Americans who do still have a stake in defending their property and their wealth and the overseeing. Just like they use black people with a whip to hit the slaves. Just like they used Irish people to beat other Irish people. Just like it's always done. Always done. There's a corrupt social layer, always, with all people. We easily are subdued. This layer includes countless academics, politicians, preachers, millionaires, civil rights leaders, you know the one I hate, and black entrepreneurs who benefit from the government's funding for minority-owned businesses. You are once again encouraged and rewarded for your selling out. Alongside the times of various left organizations, pseudo-left of course, that have long promoted identity politics in order to subordinate interests of workers and youth. They represent the strivings of a segment of upper middle class that uses politics of race and gender and sexual identity as some sort of effort, I guess, to gain more of a share of wealth exploited from the working class. With angry youth on the streets of Baltimore denouncing the mayor and other black officials, the International Socialist Organization, which hailed as Obama's 2008, God, it's been that long, It was a transformative event in the U.S. As an African American takes the highest office in the country, built on slavery, still feeling slavery's absolute beautiful remnant. Let's face it, if it was not for slavery, you probably would not have made a connecting railway system. No street would have been paved. No building would have been done. Slavery that did that. Slavery that does that most worldwide. This planet is built on a system of slavery. Slavery may be the only thing we know. Slavery may be the only way for us to get by. One group uses another group. And you get one group a little tiny bit of power and make sure they are just as guilty as the new people coming in. It's been 50 years since the Watts Rebellion in Los Angeles, one of the first waves of urban uprisings across the United States in the 60s. The call made in the 1968 Coroner Commission on Civil Disorders for massive government spending to stop the country's drift towards racial and economic polarization was never realized. Instead, President Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society programs gave way to massive outlays for the Vietnam War, politicians declaring that it was impossible to provide guns and butter. The 5 decades that have elapsed have seen the deindustrialization of major manufacturing centers like Baltimore, combined with unrelenting destructive social programs. Same time, sections of African American middle class, upper middle class, of course, have been elevated or evolved into positions of privilege and power. That's what happened. A few, especially Boule, which I'll go into detail about, are above their own people. And I don't care the color of their skin. They're the exact same class that are ruling us from Europe. By the time of Bill Clinton's election, 1992, the Democratic Party had completely repudiated its association with any kind of reform or any great social period. Clinton gutted welfare programs to provide ample supply of cheap labor for the rich, involving a growing layer of black capitalists, and passed the 1994 federal crime bill with its notorious 3 strikes provision that has helped create the largest prison population in the world, and the only thing you guys are still good at, making money. Since taking office, Obama has only escalated these revolutionary policies. Today, the American ruling class will not even provide guns and water. Tens of thousands of low-income residents in Baltimore and in Detroit are seeing their water service shut off. The only urban policy Obama and the ruling class have is to try to contain the explosive social tensions with police, military expressions, and they are, well, repressive, but incredibly well armed. Whether or whatever role racism is playing in any particular act of police violence, the events in Baltimore expose the fact that it is in fact a class that is a determining factor, with nothing to offer the masses of the people. The political and media representatives of the ruling class, along with the upper middle class boosters, are determined to block the development of politically conscious, united movement of black and white and migrant and youth against a profit system that was never made for you to get ahead. Never. Just wasn't. We are seeing our planet collapse right now. Collapse. The death of large sea creatures on the west coast, amplifying, magnifying. We are in the midst of the sixth extinction. And we are being bred and circused to death by exactly this. Our black brothers are just as easily stirred with money as our black sisters, as every other race has always been. Give a few people some money and they forget who they are. They forget where they came from. They forget what their grandparents had to go through, other than the little girl I told you about who was trained and told, this is what you do to get ahead. Humpback whales near San Francisco, gray whales, Vancouver Island, sperm whales, San Francisco, humpback whales, Santa Cruz. May 5th, beach mystery. Another dead whale washes up in Pacifica. Second time in 3 weeks a dead whale has washed up on the same beach. Something is wrong with nature. Eerily so. What are the odds of two whales found in the exact same place? Has to mean something. This is just not supposed to happen. Unnerving. Could it be caused by a lack of food? Something's going on. A 32-foot humpback whale is only 5-minute walk from the decomposing sperm whale. Totally something new, totally something strange. In 3 weeks, 5 dead whales have now beached along the northern California coast. Scientists conducted a, necropsy? Let's try and check and see what's wrong. On a 42-foot adult female hunchback. If the whale had been struck by a ship, scientists would have been able to expect to see broken ribs. They have no idea. They have no idea what's going on. But, as we have talked to the brave souls that are going up and down the western coast and seeing nothing for these large animals to eat, and the red tide, I guess we can't be surprised by the death that is happening worldwide. Our oceans are dying. Our planet is dying. We have cops more heavily armed than the people that we are paying to go out of our countries and kill people. What do we need? We have endless imperialistic wars from Africa to the Americas and across the world. 6 centuries of European dominance. Well, what has it done for us? important event that has attracted hundreds of anti-imperialist and peace activists from across the United States and Canada and Britain and Middle East and Asia. Pan-Africa Newswire. An editor addressed the conference on 4 occasions on sessions and panels during the summation, which discussed the action proposals aimed at intensifying the struggle to end the U.S. war on both international and domestically. The conference represented the largest gathering of anti-war and social justice activists this year. In order to fully understand the current period of imperialist rule throughout Africa and Asia and Latin America and within geographic borders, the European continent and the Western Hemisphere, we must acknowledge the role of the 15th century interventions in Africa and other parts of the world. 1402. The Kingdom of Castile, precursor to modern Spain, invaded the territories of northern Africa, known as the Canary Island. This period in southern European history represents the initiation of an expansion into Africa and Latin America stemming from an alliance between monarchies and mercenaries, both Spain and Portugal. This intervention into North African islands of the Mediterranean was met with fierce resistance for nearly a century. It was not until 1495 that the rulers of Spain could claim control over the Canaries. The role of Portugal in taking control of other islands, such as the Azores and Cape Verde, and the stage for the expansion of the Atlantic slave trade, the colonization of South America, Central America, the Caribbean islands, as well as, finally, an encroachment into North America. Within the Canary Islands, as early as the latter years of the 15th century, a pattern of colonialism is established that would continue and is continuing now. After the conquest, the Castilians imposed an economic model based on single crop production for export, utilizing sugar cane and later wine, which was an import item of trade with England. During this period, the first exploitive structures of a colonial regime was established. Both Gran Canary and the colony of Castile, since March 6, 1480, from 1556 of Spain to Tenerife, a Spanish colony, since 1995, separate governors, connoting the soon-to-be system of divide and rule. Along the conquering of these African islands, the transatlantic slave trade would flourish through the 19th century, when European rulers imposed colonial projects based on increasing industrialization, method of production, and labor exploitation. By this time, most of Africa had been conquered by Europe, and the Berlin Conference, 1884-1885, serving to provide legal cover for the institutionalized colonization rule, which was just genocide, socially disruptive, a system of slavery, a system of divide and conquer, make the conquerors work for you, but a few guys with a whip in their hand, because there will always be a few that will pick up the whip. So from colonization to neo-colonization, the Atlantic slave trade, this was a violent system of exploitation which brought other European countries into the process because it was such good money. After the initiation of Spain and Portugal and other nation-states in Europe became involved, including Holland and Denmark and Germany and Italy and Britain and France. It did not remain limited to Africa and Western Hemisphere, but extended towards today's Middle East, towards Asia and the Pacific Islands. Both wars were the first half of the 20th century, largely based on the struggle between various European states. The waning Ottoman Empire, which collapsed World War I, and Japan in a ruthless campaign to conquer the world and steal its resources, rape, pillage, and plunder. And of course, national liberation movements, which emerged forcefully during and after World War II, would reshape all the international politics that is now raping to death the resources and the peoples of this world. With the emergence of these newly independent states throughout Latin America earlier during the 19th century, within Africa, many parts of the Caribbean, Asia Pacific after 45, imperialist development system, neo-colonialism, where control is maintained through economic and military means despite the gaining of political independence. Because that is always a lie. The socialist revolutions in Russia, a lie. China, a lie. North Korea, big fat nasty lie. North Vietnam, later Cuba, provided an alternative model for the exact same situation, where all the post-colonial underdeveloped states would challenge imperialism on a global scale but still be the exact same two-headed beast. And although after the collapse of the Soviet Union, allegedly, and the Eastern European socialist states by the 90s, the U.S. imperialists suggested this would be the so-called peace, except to be divided. But, peace is a little tiny bit of a something that was whole. So peace, no matter how you spell it, does not sound too good. Nevertheless, shareholders only found new ways to embark upon other wars. Wars would never stop. They make too much money. Slavery makes too much money. There are more slaves right now on this planet than there ever have been. Of course, there's more people. But somebody's making a lot of money. And from Iraq, Afghanistan, Panama, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Sudan, and all the other geopolitical regions of this planet that are not real, wherever you make the imaginary line, the wars of regime change have proved to be just as deadly, just as destabilizing as everything from the previous century. Recent report from the UN Refugee Advocacy indicated the number of internationally displaced people and migrants are higher than any period since the conclusion of World War II. It's estimated that well over 50 million people have been dislocated, with a large segment of these in populations emanating from the U.S. instigated wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, the Horn of Africa, so Somalia, Ethiopia, all around there, you know. So we are witnessing the impact of these dislocations in the Mediterranean this year, within the same region where the transatlantic slave trade was born. 2,000 people have died at sea so far just this year. The problem will not end till those of us based in the U.S. industrialized states build a formidable anti-imperialist, anti-war movement with the alliance of the peoples, the opposed nations, to end the modern wars of conquest. The impoverished of the nationally oppressed, the working class in Europe and North America cannot be ended until imperialism is destroyed. Therefore, our fate is linked with the status and the futures of all the people in the world. You know, in pushing other species to extinction, humanity is busy sawing off the limb on which we perch. I've said it many times. We come together as a family, or we will die together as one. It's at that point. It really is. You had a chance to stop the Federal Reserve. I think I was the only person who talked about it. No, that's back. That's back. We have banks, Deutsche Bank in particular, that paid $2.5 billion fine for rigging the market. They had that much money. What do they care? And again, back to Meg. She spent 2 years, well, 2 decades, hoping whoever killed her sister would someday face justice. Sonia, last seen in London, her body found 5 days later. 40-minute drive, southwest basically. In a case without resolution, Meg finds solace in her sister's final resting place. It's a pretty area. I've seen the pictures. It's leafy and it's green in summer, surrounded by clearly visible mounds of soil, earthworks, they're called, intentionally shaped around a fortified village built centuries ago by the Atawandaran, which are dead now, extinct. This is a real tragedy for us, and definitely for Sonia and her child. But I look at the place as being a sacred place, Meg said. If it had to happen, I'm glad it happened here. Sonia was killed at a time where headlines about missing and murdered women almost non-existent. Meg has seen the frequency of these headlines increase, but has not seen justice. It's almost like we're getting inundated with this information now, she says. People are just kind of like, oh, that's just another missing and murdered woman. It sort of passes by or under or around everyone's radar. That's part of why Sonia in death has become Sonia Nadine May. How many other Sonias have been murdered or gone missing? Meg wonders. She doesn't know exactly. What she does know is that nearly 1,200 indigenous women, of course, ones who have status, have gone missing or been murdered in the last 3 decades. That's according to an RCMP report released last year. Yet some believe those high numbers understate the truth dramatically. The RCMP report statistically skewed. Palmetier, who we've talked about with I Don't Know More protests, Chudak and I have mentioned her. She highlights the numerous problems with anything the RCMP says. To name a few, limitations of the Canadian Police Information Centre, whose disappearances were never documented, women whose disappearances were never documented or mislabeled as white, highly problematic, reliance on status to determine who is Indigenous, of course, the violence Aboriginal women and girls face from the RCMP itself, per a lengthy Human Rights Watch report, which we have talked about. Amongst all this violence, there could be 15 Sonias that have been murdered, Meg says. She would like people to know her Sonia, to know her strengths, her skills, and how much she was loved, how much she is missed, how much her family still hopes for justice, and the unborn baby that they will never meet. Early April this year, Meg wrote an opinion piece. Her first sentence is, why a national inquiry is a national inquiry going to answer to the question and solve the epidemic of Canada's missing and murdered women and girls? Her answer was, I don't think so. I'm not really popular, Meg says, because she doesn't support an inquiry. Yet in the community she surrounds herself with, she says many support her. Many Indigenous people across Canada agree with her. Others still are unsure. There is no uniform Indigenous opinion, believe it or not, on whether an inquiry would help. Moreover, much of the media attention is focused on a push for a national inquiry, although when you talk to people, there is no trust that the government is going to just suddenly start telling the truth, that the police are going to suddenly be noble when they've been found over and over again to be causing the problem. Part of why Meg doesn't support this is because there are so many factors underlying this that she thinks need to be addressed first. As she wrote in her opinion piece, there are those living on or off the reserve, poverty, homelessness, drug, alcohol, substance abuse, lack of safe housing, lack of adequate education, job skills, early pregnancy, gang activity, abductions, mental issues, domestic abuse, violence, child welfare. Questions about the lack of stricter sentencing, adoption, inadequate policing, or even looking into the death or disappearance at all levels, to name a few. Arguments in favor of an inquiry have, of course, been passionate and personal and pervasive. Big worries about all that money that would be spent. That money, she believes, that would be better used to reinstate funding for projects like Sisters in Spirit and all of those halfway houses and gathering homes that they've just closed across Canada, where people could go for fellowship. They're closed. A research, education, policy initiative led by Aboriginal women instead of, non-Aboriginal women who are running it now, or were running it in the past. All that funding was cut. In 2010, community-led prevention projects, mostly gone now. Meg fears that an inquiry will diminish the voices of the very people it's supposed to help. The families who've lost loved ones. Focusing on lawyers who have been caught time and again taking the money, charging people before they go in, of course, judges, First Nations representatives, of course, who, just as corrupt because it's easier. Still pretty easy to get our own people to carry the whip, whatever form of that whip may come in. I don't know. 2014 report from the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous People highlighted Canada's failing. But unfortunately, they don't understand the many, many levels Canada is failing. Despite positive steps, the numerous initiatives that have taken the federal, provincial, territorial levels to address problems faced by Indigenous people have been insufficient. The gap between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people in Canada has not narrowed over the last couple of years. Treaty Aboriginal claims remain persistently unresolved. Indigenous women and girls vulnerable to abuse. Overall, there appear to be high levels of distrust amongst Indigenous peoples towards the government at both federal and provincial levels. Inquiry will do almost nothing, really. The ways in which Canada's laws, organizations, politics have even contributed disproportionately high rates of violence against Indigenous women and girls, particular, it would open Canada's eyes, I guess, so they'd start viewing the actual problem in a real light. But in general, Canadians do not value First Nations women. It calls into question something they do not want to see. Americans certainly don't want to see it. Worrying about people coming over your border? Yeah, that's right. That sucks. It sucks. And whatever unimaginable horrors could happen to a child. These things have happened. These things have happened under the guise of religion that doesn't belong here, that doesn't even belong to Europe. It's African. And you don't understand what you're reading because it's never been presented to you properly. When we look at the residential school sex abuse that was transported here, and yes, it happened in Europe first and everywhere Europeans landed, this is an institutionalized idea. Participation, or a participant in the recent study that revealed children of Indian residential school survivors, victims of childhood abuse, were significantly more likely to sexually assault after. Victims become the perpetrators. The Cedar Project examined drug use too in young Indigenous women and girls over a 7-year period in British Columbia. The study showed that if a girl was a victim of childhood abuse, or at least had one parent who even attended residential school, 10 times more likely to be sexually assaulted later in life. All the Indigenous participants were found to be also drug users at some point in their life. Not surprising findings here. The sexual assaults, the rates, way higher than I'm sure we've heard again. Now Pierre, of one of the Cedar Project's findings, shown an outreach worker with providing alternatives, counseling, education, society. An organization located in East Side, Vancouver, that offers services for the city's sex worker community. And let me tell you about Vancouver. Beautiful, gorgeous city. Violent, Wild West, scary stuff. If you only have one parent who went to a residential school, those children react. The system was horrific. This is why we can't get over it. We can't. It's not over. Yes, all of our children, all different shades of skin, are suffering from these things. But you have created your own death. We have created our own death. This is our circus. These are our monkeys. Center for Health Evaluation Outcome Scientists, following a group of 259 Indigenous women. Most are doing drugs by 12, 13. Even trying to get former sex trades workers to help these women is difficult. But they found one who is helping many Indigenous women and girls, just like the workers, or the ex-workers, the ones who have gone to school and, yes, lost their Indian status for doing it. How do you recover when everything is taken from you? You go to their school, if you want to go to their university. Up until the 70s, you were no longer Indian. This is where we stand. And to try to find the truth out of this, you ask for more news. So join me on Thursday.